Stop staring at the sky waiting to see a spaceship. If extraterrestrials really are here, and Dolores Cannon documented that in thousands of recorded sessions before she died in 2014, they aren't hovering over your roof. They're sitting on your couch. They're inside the bodies of ordinary people who work, pay bills, suffer from anxiety, and have no idea they carry, at the base of their nervous system, a memory that doesn't belong to this planet. And the most disturbing thing isn't that statement. The most disturbing thing is what Dolores discovered when she started putting these people into deep trance and listened to what came out of their mouths. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly the method she developed, what the patients revealed about the nature of the soul, and why this information, stored for decades on cassette tapes in rural Arkansas, exposes the exact reason why you feel like a foreigner inside your own life, incoherent inside your own skin, and incapable of accessing the reality that deep down you feel should be yours. Dolores Cannon wasn't born a mystic. That needs to be clear from the start. She was born in 1931 in Missouri into a Catholic family, ordinary, with no contact with what is now called alternative spirituality. Her life followed a completely standard script for a woman of her generation. She married early, in her early 20s, to Johnny Cannon, a U.S. Navy serviceman. And it was precisely this seemingly ordinary marriage that broke the first seal of silence in her mind. Because Johnny was transferred from base to base, and Dolores was dragged along with him to places the Missouri girl never imagined she'd set foot. She lived in Hawaii before Hawaii became a tourist destination. She lived in the Far East. She was exposed to religions, traditions, spiritual architectures that most Americans of that period didn't even know existed. And what happens to a Western nervous system when it's immersed year after year in contexts where reincarnation is a given, where the soul has multiple layers, where death is merely a portal? It begins to crack. The inherited certainties start to unravel. Not all at once, not with a fanfare, but silently, the way real truths always enter the human body. It was during this period that Dolores began reading everything she could get her hands on about paranormal phenomena, parapsychology, altered states of consciousness. She was self-taught, obsessive, methodical. She wrote everything down in notebooks, but she still hadn't taken the practical step. She was only absorbing, digesting, letting the material ferment. And here appears the first neurological lesson of this video, because that's no accident. The human brain doesn't change its pattern through information. It changes its pattern through accumulated exposure to a reality different from the default reality. Dolores was, without knowing it, preparing herself to function as a receiver of signals that her society still considered impossible. She was, literally, reformatting her own perceptual field before she would need it. And the field asked to be used. It happened in the late 1950s. Johnny became interested in hypnosis, something that at that time was beginning to be popularized as a therapeutic tool, especially for addictions. The couple's first human laboratory was banal, almost disappointing when you first hear about it. They started inducing people into trance to quit smoking, a pragmatic, simple technique with direct suggestions at the surface of the mind. You go into a light trance, hear a suggestion like cigarettes taste bad, cigarettes are bad for you, you no longer feel the urge, and you come out. And it worked for a few weeks, and then it collapsed. It was this flaw, this systematic relapse of patients, that turned the key. Because Dolores, methodical to the point of obsession, realized that superficial suggestion never stuck. The patient left the office seemingly converted, and 3 weeks later had the pack back in their pocket. This enraged her curiosity. If the surface doesn't hold the instruction, then where must the instruction be engraved? The answer for anyone who understands the nervous system is obvious. It must be engraved in a layer deeper than the rational mind can reach while awake. And it was at that moment that Dolores and Johnny began inducing deep trance states, what in classical hypnotic literature is called the somnambulistic state. It's not sleep, it's not wakefulness, it's an intermediate zone where the critical cortex is asleep, brainwaves slow down to theta, and the subconscious, that part of you that records everything, that keeps everything, that judges nothing, becomes exposed and available for dialogue. And it was there, inside that state, that the thing began to spiral out of control. Patients who came in to quit smoking started saying things no one had asked. They described scenes that weren't theirs. They spoke in voices that weren't theirs. And Dolores, instead of treating this as interference or fantasy, did what no other hypnotherapist in her area was doing. She began to document, every session recorded, every sentence transcribed, every anomaly catalogued. If you are watching this video, it's probably because deep down you recognize the same mechanism inside yourself. You recite affirmations in the morning, try to think positive, try to visualize prosperity, try to believe you deserve a different life. And yet, every single day your body wakes up vibrating the same emotional pattern as always. Tightness in the chest, urgency, contraction, fear of bills, fear of criticism, fear of not being enough. The surface repeats the mantra. The depth repeats the past. And as long as these two layers don't talk to each other, you remain paralyzed. Exactly like one of Dolores's patients who was still smoking 3 months after being cured by surface suggestion. The universe, the field, reality, or whatever you prefer to call it, doesn't give you back your words. It gives you back the energetic signature your body transmits 24 hours a day. And if that signature is one of scarcity, fear, unworthiness, you won't reprogram it by reading a book or writing in a gratitude journal. This needs to be engraved in another layer. That's why I prepared the Prosperity Magnet for you. A 28-day journey built to pull you out of the scarcity identity and take you, day after day, into the state where money, relationships, and opportunities stop being something you chase and start being something that responds to your new frequency. It's not a reading course, it's a reprogramming of the internal field. The access link, along with the testimonial from someone who has already completed the first 28 days, is in the first pinned comment right below this video. Before I continue Dolores's story, do one thing for yourself. Comment down below the phrase "I choose to remember," because everything that follows depends on you accepting that what lies dormant inside you has permission to wake up. Let's return to Dolores. The case that became the turning point in her life came disguised as routine. A woman, referred to in the records as Anita, sought out the canons for help with 2 specific and utterly earthly problems: chronic anxiety and compulsive eating. She didn't come seeking enlightenment. She didn't come seeking contact with the beyond. She came because she couldn't stop eating and couldn't breathe properly. Dolores did what she had been doing, induced deep trance, took Anita into the somnambulistic state, and began to investigate the emotional origin of the symptoms. Only this time the origin was not in Anita's childhood. It was not in any trauma from her current life. Anita, in the somnambulistic state, began to describe, in meticulous detail, a life in Chicago in the 1920s. She spoke of streets, names, dresses, a specific man, a historical context that she, in her everyday life, had never studied. Dolores stopped. Johnny stopped. And they looked at each other with the same silent question. What do we do with this? Dismissing it as fantasy was the easy path. It was what any conventional therapist would have done. But Dolores had that quiet accumulation of reading, that perceptual field already reshaped by years of exposure to other cosmologies. She did not dismiss it. She documented it, and she began asking specific questions within the trance, testing, cross-referencing information, verifying historical facts that Anita could not have consciously known, and every verification matched, every detail clicked. That was when the first real protocol for past life regression within the canon's work was born. And more importantly, that was when Dolores understood that the symptoms of the present body, the anxiety that suffocated Anita, the compulsion that made her eat non-stop, had roots that were not in the current body. They were inscribed in a deeper layer, a layer that does not belong to this incarnation, but that continues to influence the biochemistry of the body now. An emotional trauma stored in another timeline kept emitting a signal into the present nervous system. And as long as that signal was not accessed and reprocessed, no diet, no anxiolytic, no rational office conversation was going to solve it. Notice what this discovery implies, because it touches you directly. You try to stop repeating a pattern. You promise you won't choose the same kind of relationship again, won't sabotage the same kind of project again, won't inflate the same kind of bank account again. You promise in no uncertain terms, and yet 3 months later you are exactly in the same place. That is not a lack of willpower. That is an instruction engraved in a layer that your rational mind cannot reach. You are trying to drive the car by the steering wheel, while the actual steering is being done by a driver you have never gotten to know. And here Dolores's life was violently interrupted. Johnny, her husband, suffered a serious accident. The research was shelved. The equipment was put away. For years, Dolores did not return to the sessions, absorbed in caring for him. And you need to understand the weight of this to understand what came after. She was away for years from a work that already fascinated her, that was already yielding results. And what happened in the silence of those years was a maturation. The questions continued to burn inside her. The notes continued to be reread. And when she finally returned, now alone, she returned with a different intention. She no longer wanted only to regress. She wanted to speak to the instance that knew everything. In her early past life sessions, Dolores had noticed something strange. Sometimes in the middle of the account, the patient's voice shifted subtly. It was no longer the character from the past life. It was as if something broader had taken control, answering questions with a cold precision, offering information about the current body, about diseases that were coming or already in place, about personal decisions the patient was facing. Dolores began calling this instance the subconscious, with a capital S. It wasn't the subconscious of Freudian psychology. It was something larger. She described it as if each person were connected to a kind of layer of collective consciousness, an intelligence that viewed the current life from the outside, with context from multiple lives, multiple dimensions, multiple possibilities. And from there she designed the method. She named it Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique, QHHT. The technique combined 2 movements. First, take the patient to the most relevant past lives, the ones the subconscious chose to show in order to explain the present. Second, at the end of the session, make direct contact with this greater instance and ask specific questions about the patient's health, purpose, and blockages. And what she began to document, session after session, was something the scientific community still doesn't know what to do with. Patients with concrete medical diagnoses reported improvements. Emotional patterns lasting years dissolved in a single session, not as a miracle, as a deep layer reprogramming. The instruction arrived in theta, was recorded, and the body began to execute a new version of itself. And it is precisely for this reason that deep state reprogramming is not motivational content. It is identity medicine. The prosperity magnet was designed within this same logic. 28 days, daily protocols, delivery to the right layer. If you haven't opened it yet, the link is in the first pinned comment below. Don't put it off. The pattern that brought you to this video won't wait. Let's return to the accounts, because this is where things start to get truly unsettling. As Dolores repeated QHHT on hundreds and then thousands of patients, a pattern began to emerge. The accounts were no longer limited to past lives in Chicago or ancient Rome. Patients began describing existences in other historical periods, in other layers of time, and, more disturbingly, in settings that did not seem to belong to this planet. Cities made of crystalline structures, bodies that were not made of flesh, forms of communication that did not use words, and the subconscious confirmed, with that clinical coldness Dolores so admired, that the soul of that patient had already passed through places for which he, in his waking life, had no vocabulary to name. More than that, the accounts began to include the experience of death, not as an end, as a transition. Patients described with serene detail how they had died in previous lives, what they felt at the moment, what happened afterward. They described review rooms, meetings with guides, planning for the next incarnations, and Dolores, always methodical, compared accounts from patients who did not know each other, who lived in different cities, who had never heard of one another. And the patterns matched. The descriptions were structurally identical. And within that work emerged the most valuable part for you, who are watching now. The subconscious, when questioned about why that patient had developed a specific symptom, gave precise answers. A chronic lower back pain was, often, the weight of an unresolved responsibility from another incarnation. A persistent financial block appeared linked to vows of poverty made in monastic lives. An inability to receive love had its origin in a scene of betrayal experienced centuries ago. I am not saying this is the only possible explanation for any symptom. I am saying what Dolores documented. And what she documented is that the human body functions as a multi-layered memory machine, and a part of what you call your problems may be fueled by ancient instructions that remain active within your field. Think about what that means in practical terms. You are trying to thrive, but inside you there is an ancient instruction saying that money corrupts, that abundance is danger, that being seen means being punished. As long as this instruction remains active, every advance will generate a retreat. You will build and destroy. You will attract and sabotage, not because you are weak, because inside you there is a pilot running code you never consciously approved. And it is from here that Dolores' work crosses the line that divided her community in two. In the 80s, 90s, and especially in the 2000s, the accounts coming from patients began to include, with increasing frequency, contact with beings from other origins. We are not talking about dreams. We are talking about descriptions made in a somnambulistic state under rigorous methodology by ordinary people seeking help for anxiety, insomnia, depression, chronic pain, and who, within the trance, would begin to describe their existence before incarnating here. And what these descriptions revealed, with a consistency that Dolores considered impossible to ignore, was that many of these souls did not originate from Earth. She began to call these souls volunteers, and from her work, the concept of starseeds became popularized. Stellar seeds, souls who would have come from other systems to fulfill a specific mission on Earth. Dolores organized these accounts into 3 waves. The first wave, according to her, would be composed of older souls who arrived here shortly after the collective trauma of the nuclear era, when the planet emitted a plea for help into the cosmos due to the risk of self-destruction. These souls would have come with the mission of holding the energy, of anchoring a higher frequency on a planet that was nearly destroying itself. The second wave, more numerous, would be composed of facilitators, transmitters, people who act as bridges between humanity's old frequency and the new one. And the third wave, even newer, would be of children and young people who are already arriving with their nervous system pre-programmed for the new pattern without needing to deconstruct the old one. You don't need to accept this cosmology as religious fact to recognize the psychological mechanics it describes. What Dolores was documenting at its core is that within a significant number of human beings there exists a deep, persistent, almost unbearable feeling of not belonging. A feeling that life on Earth makes no sense, that the dominant values are absurd, that there is a silent mission hammering from within that no one can name. If you are watching this video up to this point, you probably know this feeling. You look at the way the world works, and something inside you knows that this is not it. You look at the life you have built, and something inside you knows that this is still not it. It is not clinical depression. It is not a lack of gratitude. It is a longing for a frequency that your nervous system remembers and has not yet been able to materialize here. And it is precisely this longing that turns into a prosperity block when it is not listened to. Because the body, not knowing what to do with this chronic misalignment, begins to sabotage everything it tries to crystallize. You don't block money because you hate money. You block money because deep down your nervous system hasn't yet decided if it's here to stay. As long as your field is split between homesickness for the place you left and the mission of being here, you'll build with one hand and dismantle with the other. That's why I prepared the Iman de Prosperidad Equan within this exact context, not as a generic manifestation method, but as a 28-day reprogramming for your nervous system to finally stop treating material abundance as spiritual betrayal. The journey was designed to reconcile these 2 layers, the soul that came from elsewhere and the body that needs to prosper here in the currency that circulates on this planet in the time you have. The link is in the first pinned comment. If you made it to this part of the video, the invitation isn't motivational. It's logistical. Decide before tomorrow, because the version of you that closes this window is exactly the version that will wake up tomorrow, executing the same pattern as always. Dolores Cannon died in October 2014. She left behind more than 70 books, a publishing house she founded herself to get material published that no conventional publisher would accept, and an academy that to this day trains QHHT practitioners in dozens of countries. She never secured the seal of formal scientific community approval, and she never much cared. What she built was an international community dedicated to exploring, with its own methodology, what official science still cannot measure. Tape recordings stacked on shelves in her office document accounts that are still being processed. Sessions with anonymous patients who never spoke of the matter again in everyday life, but whose words, recorded in a somnambulistic state, continue to echo within the community she left behind. Her legacy is not a religion. It is not a dogma, it is a method. And the method says one thing that you may need to hear very carefully before closing this video. It says that within you there is an instance that knows the reason why you came, that knows why your body freezes when it comes to receiving, that knows what ancient instruction needs to be rewritten for your current life to finally unlock. That instance is not on your Instagram, not on your bank statement, not in what others say about you. It is waiting, silent, behind the line of the critical cortex in the same theta zone where Dolores's patients access the truth that their waking lives could not see. You have two options now. The first is to close this window, move on to the next video in the feed, sleep tonight, and wake up tomorrow with the same body, the same breathing pattern, the same tightness in your chest, the same feeling of spinning in place inside a life that should be yours. It is a legitimate option. Most of humanity chooses this one. There is no judgment. There is only consequence. The nervous system, without a new command, always repeats the previous command. That's basic biology. The second option is to decide now that the information that passed through this video will not return to the unconscious, that you will do something concrete with it in the next few hours, that you will click on the first pinned comment, look at what is on the other side of the link, and choose whether or not your nervous system deserves to undergo a 28-day reprogramming. It is not manufactured urgency, it is structural urgency. Every additional day executing the old pattern is another day of recording that pattern in deep layers. And each day is more expensive than the one before. Fun translator's note. Imã da Prosperidade is a proper name kept in Portuguese as per translation rules. Dolores spent decades listening to ordinary people describing in trance who they really were before forgetting. And what became clear in her work is that forgetting is not an accident. It is structure. You were born to forget in order to live the experience of human amnesia. But there is a moment within this experience when the soul asks to remember, and that moment, for many people, arrives disguised as suffering, as stagnation, as an unbearable feeling that this is not it. If you felt something during this video, if some passage made the back of your neck tingle, if at any moment your chest recognized before your head understood, leave it recorded. Comment below the phrase, "I choose to remember," not as engagement, as a signature, as an identity command, as a marking for your own nervous system that the forgetting has ended in this timeline. And after commenting, open the first pinned comment. What is on the other side is not a course, it is the beginning of a reprogramming. Biology is waiting for your instruction. Decide.